Okay, welcome back. We're looking at May-June 2023, question paper 12, and we'll start from the bottom again. This is a relatively difficult paper, at least in my opinion, in comparison to the other papers that we've done so far. There are some relatively difficult questions that require a bit of abstract thinking, but let's begin with question 30. So economic growth leads to increased levels of income and consumption per capita for the adult population. So what does that mean? That means that on average the income levels and the amount that's being spent on average per person for the adult population will increase. What circumstances are needed for this to happen in an economy? So for the first one, a change in technology that maintains the same level of output. Well, that kind of gives it to you in the question. If they maintain the same level of output, it's not going to result in economic growth, because we need our output or our real GDP to increase for us to experience economic growth. B, an increase in economic efficiency through higher productivity of factor inputs. Okay, now that will, because as we become more efficient and we get higher productivity, that's going to lead to economic growth, and that will also lead to the per capita levels of income and consumption increasing. It's going to shift our AD to the right. As we become more efficient and we start to produce more, we'll be able to produce more with the same level of resources that we had previously, which means that therefore the rewards that come through to workers will be higher, and there'll be more spent by those workers on average in the economy. A policy of progressive taxation to reduce inequality. So we know that's going to be wrong. And why is that wrong? Progressive taxes will reduce inequalities, but remember that that is essentially not an increase in the income or consumption per capita. It's just a transfer, right? So it's like a movement from high income individuals to low income individuals, which is transferring or reducing the inequality of income, but it doesn't necessarily result in each person on average having more income and consumption per capita to spend. And then a rise in the size of the working population due to immigration. So if the size of the working population increases due to immigration, it will lead to economic growth. But as we get an increase in the population, the levels of income and consumption per capita may remain the same. So it's like, for example, if we increase our output by 10%, but we've now got 10% more people in our labour force, then the income levels and consumption levels will stay the same, because the level of our labour force increase will be matched by the increase in economic growth. So the only thing that's going to lead to levels of income and consumption per capita increasing is higher productivity or more economic efficiency that we can achieve. Okay, it's the same kind of theory as our PPC. Supply side policies can be used to correct cost push inflation. So remember, cost push inflation is where AS has moved to the left, and supply side policies is where we're trying to move AS to the right. Okay, now it says which policy would best achieve this aim in the long run, so over a long period of time. So allowing trade unions to maintain work practices irrespective of productivity. So just like we explained in question 30, if it's irrespective of productivity, in the long run that is not going to allow us to achieve that aim, because we need to become more productive in order to correct it, right? Because we need to have our shift in AS over the long term, and a shift in AS to the right allows us to increase our productive capacity. If we encourage workers to work extra hours for extra pay, that's not going to fix cost push inflation. Remember that cost push inflation is a movement of AS to the left due to the cost of production increasing. So even if we're making more, if we then have to pay those workers more to increase the level of output, that doesn't mean that we're any more productive. So it's not going to allow us to shift AS to the right in the long run. It just means that we may be able to have a short-term increase in our level of output, but our cost of production is still going to increase anyway, because we're going to have to pay those labour or the labour, which is the workers, more additional income anyway. And if we increase total labour supply by employing more unskilled workers, so the same kind of effect here. In the short run, that may allow us to increase our total output, but again, we're looking for increases in productivity, and unskilled labour is unlikely to be as productive as skilled labour. So if it was skilled labour, for example, then it may allow us to correct the cost push inflation, because that may allow us to become more productive. But unskilled workers are not going to allow us to increase our productivity. Whereas if we support the replacement of labour-manned machines by the use of robots, what's the thing that we know from our capital-intensive and labour-intensive methods of production? We know that capital tends to be more productive than labour. So as we switch to more capital, our productivity, which is the key thing that we're looking for, because we're looking to increase our productive capacity, will increase. And in the long run, we can sustain that productive capacity increase due to that increase in productivity. 28. Not going to spend too long on this. A government wishes to reduce the deficit on the secondary income section of its current account balance of payments. Okay, so remember, the secondary income section are keywords that we associate with that section are gifts, which are payments transferred, and then it's also overseas aid or grants between governments, etc., aid between governments. So an increase in subsidies to exporters, that's going to affect our balance of either trade in goods or balance of trade in services. The same with B. Remember, there's 4 components on the current account. There's the balance of trade in goods, there's the balance of trade in services, there's the primary income account, and then there's the secondary income account. We're looking to reduce the deficit, so we're looking to improve our current account balance of payments, which is either reducing our debits, which is the money that's going out, or increasing our credits, which is the money that's coming in. So based on our keywords that we know from our secondary income section, we can see that the correct answer here should be a reduction in overseas aid donations. If we reduce the overseas aid donations, it's one of our keywords of secondary income, we're going to be reducing the level of debits that we have on that section, and if our credits stay the same, it's going to reduce the deficit on that secondary income section. Okay, C doesn't apply. A reduction in the number of migrant workers allowed into the country, it's going to affect the primary income section. Okay, 27. Change colour here. Shows current equilibrium of an economy. The government introduces a contractionary monetary policy. Okay, what is the most likely outcome? So, contractionary monetary policy, what do we know that it's going to do? It's going to shift AD to the left, because that's what it's designed for. Okay, now for the most likely effect of this, all we have to do is find it here, right? So here's our output. We go from Y to Y1. And then our general price level comes down from P to P1. So what do we have therefore? Price level indicates inflation. Yeah, so we know that we're going to have a fall in inflation. So we know that it's going to be either A or C. Okay, and then we need to figure out, will it have a fall in investment or a rise in investment? So to figure this out is very simple. The components of aggregate demand are C, consumer expenditure. Oh, sorry. Oh, apologies, bear with me. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, those two will be in brackets to reflect our net exports. So what we can see is that a component of AD is investment. So what is the most likely thing to happen? The most likely thing to happen as a result of AD moving to the left is that the components of AD have decreased. Therefore, the most likely thing to happen is we would have a fall in investment due to the decrease in output or the shift in AD to the left. Okay, remember, output can reflect our changes in investment and our changes in consumer expenditure too. Question 26. Good question, this one. The world consists of two countries. Wow, the world only has two countries, country M and country N. What a boring world. Graph shows their PPC for wheat and for rice. They both operate on their PPCs, and before specialization, country M produces 60 units of wheat, country N produces 30 units of wheat. What would be the world output of rice if both of these countries decided to specialize according to comparative advantage? Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what they're going to specialize in, and then we'll figure out what the old output was and what the new output will be. So the first thing we can see here is the opportunity cost of producing wheat for country M is 1 rice, whereas the opportunity cost of producing wheat for country N is 1.5 rice. Therefore, country M is going to focus on making wheat, and because the opportunity cost of making rice is 2/3, 0.66 for country N, and it's 1 for country M, country N is going to make rice. Okay, so therefore our new level of output for rice when they specialize is going to be 75 rice. Okay, now we need to figure out where they were on these PPCs. So country M produced 60 units of wheat. We can see that their opportunity cost is 1:1. So if they're producing 60 wheat here, that means that they must have been producing 40 rice before specialization occurred. Now for country N, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out, but they're giving up 1.5 rice every time. So when they were making 30 wheat, which is what we're told they were before they specialized, then based on that they must have been making 30 rice. Okay, now I'll show you an easy way to calculate that. 25 wheat here, so if we're assuming it's 25 wheat, that would equal 37.5 units of rice for country M, right? Now every time they increase their output of wheat, they have to give up 1.5 rice. So if they want to make 30 wheat, that would equal 37.5 minus 7.5, which is 1.5 the opportunity cost multiplied by those 5 extra units. Therefore, at their PPC, 30 wheat would be 30 rice. Okay, so therefore our old output would be 40 rice and 30 rice, which is 70, and our new output is 75. So what has happened? It has risen by 5 units. Okay, question 25. So what can definitely change a country's terms of trade? Now this comes up very often. Okay, when the price of imported raw materials increases. So first of all, what is our terms of trade? It's our index of export prices divided by the index of import prices, so the average prices of both, multiplied by 100. Okay, now if the price of imported raw materials increases, that is obviously going to change the index of import prices, right? So that will definitely affect the terms of trade. Similarly, with if we have an appreciation of the exchange rate, that is also going to change the prices of imports and exports. So that will also cause a definite change in the terms of trade. Remember that an appreciation, what's it going to do? It's going to make our total imports go up and our total exports go down. And in terms of prices, that will be the price of the exports go up and the price of the imports go down. Okay? Whereas with inflation, or a change in inflation rates, they're not telling us that it's a change in inflation, right? So it's possible that that could be passed on to our exporters. But there are certain situations where the change in inflation rates does not necessarily result in a change in the terms of trade. Because if we think about it, there can be exporters who are importing raw materials from other countries, right? If we have inflation in our own country, they may be able to import at the same price that they were previously getting because they're not affected by our domestic rate of inflation. Therefore, they can keep the price of their exported materials the same. And the other thing to take into account here is it's a change in the inflation rate, not a change in the inflation, right? Remember, the inflation rate is just a comparison between one year and the other, right? So a change in inflation rates is not always passed on to exports. Therefore, it is not something we can definitively say will change a country's terms of trade. Although it might, it is not definitive, it is not 100%. Therefore, correct answer will be C for that one, for 25. Now, this part here, just to stress this comes up really often, okay? So make sure that you're aware of this, that a change in the inflation rates will not necessarily affect the terms of trade, okay? If it is to affect the terms of trade, they will give you more specific circumstances, okay? They'll add a bit more information onto it. Question 24. If a country is experiencing a period of high inflation, which groups will benefit the most from this? Okay. Companies that export the majority of their output, are they going to benefit from high inflation? Probably not. Okay. Why? Because the price of their goods and services may have risen, which makes their exports less desirable or less competitive internationally. Fixed income earners are definitely not going to benefit from a period of inflation. Again, why is that? Because their income stays the same, so when there's high inflation, they're losing purchasing power, or they're losing the real value of their incomes, as everything gets more expensive but their income stays the same. Whereas those with high debts, they can benefit from inflation, especially if the rate of interest that they're paying back is less than the rate of inflation. Then what they borrow at is actually less in real terms than what the price value or the price level is in the economy during the time that they have high inflation. Okay, so D is our correct answer there. 23. Which combination of policies would be effective in reducing a balance of payment current account surplus? So, if we have a surplus in the current account balance of payments, we can assume, right, that our exports are higher than our imports. Okay, there are other components to it as well, but we just simplify it by using it this way, especially when we see what they've given us here: tariffs, devaluation, and expansionary monetary policy. So to reduce a surplus, therefore, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to increase imports and decrease exports. Okay, So we just take it one by one. Would we have a decrease in tariffs on imports? Yes, we would, because that would allow us to import more, which is what we're trying to achieve, right? So we're saying that we want to reduce the surplus, we want imports to increase. So yes. Devaluation of the exchange rate. Remember, a devaluation of the exchange rate is like, essentially it's the depreciation. A devaluation is going to result in the price of exports going down, therefore the total exports going up, and the price of imports going up, therefore the total imports going down. Right? Which is the opposite effect of what we're trying to achieve that we just stressed here. Therefore, we're not going to want a devaluation of the exchange rate. And then before we even get to the last one, we've got the correct answer if we know those two. But just to explain it, expansionary monetary policy is likely to move AD to the right, okay? And it's likely or possible to generate some economic or actual economic growth. Now, one of the things that we know about economies when they experience economic growth is that generally they will increase the level of their imports, okay? Because as we get more money available to us, or as our economy starts to perform better, we start to get access or have a higher demand for goods and services in other countries that we can bring into our own. Therefore, we're more likely to import more goods as we generate that economic growth. Table shows the types of unemployment and their possible solutions. Which combination is not correct? Okay, so we'll start at the bottom. If we have structural unemployment, is the way to fix it to retrain workers? Yes, it is. Remember, structural unemployment can either be regional or technological, and the way that we fix it is by using supply-side policies, like retraining workers is education and training, which is a supply-side policy. Structural unemployment is one of our long-term forms of unemployment, which is why we try and fix it by using a supply-side policy. Frictional unemployment is a short-term form of unemployment where people are out of work for short periods of time generally. And yes, the way to fix it is to increase the mobility of workers, and through increasing advertising of job vacancies. What's that going to do? That's going to make people that are searching for work more likely to be able to find the information. It's kind of like a form of addressing information failure, essentially, right? So that will work. Cyclical unemployment is through a lack of AD. Therefore, if we raise government spending, what are we doing? We're using an expansionary fiscal policy, which is designed to shift AD to the right. Therefore, that is a way of addressing cyclical unemployment. So we can see that the correct answer that's left is technological unemployment is a form of structural unemployment here. It's where technological advances mean that workers' jobs become redundant. Great example is in supermarkets, for example. We now have automatic cash out machines or checkout machines instead of workers working on the tills. Minimum legislation or minimum wage legislation is not going to affect technological unemployment. They need to use the same method that they use down here, which is to retrain workers, either to be able to work with the technology or to be able to gain new skills so that they can move into different industries. 21. The first time I've seen this style of question. Circular flow of income is one of those things that was recently added to the new syllabus, so I can pretty much guarantee that a question will come up on it. An MCQ question anyway, for certain. The good thing is about the essays, you can kind of ignore them because you get a choice of the macro essays anyway, and generally unemployment, inflation or deflation, and AD or AS is, out of those three, you generally have an essay question anyway. But just to go through this, so what can be concluded about the direction of the flows? Consumer expenditure flows anti-clockwise. Okay, so first thing is, what is consumer expenditure? Consumer expenditure is money that we spend as households to firms, right? Now if we follow this, we can see that consumer expenditure would be here, from households to the product market and then into firms, and that is not flowing anti-clockwise, that is flowing clockwise. Okay, you can see that the outer ring here is the one that's flowing clockwise, and the inner ring is the one that's flowing anti-clockwise. Goods and services flow clockwise, so that's going to be wrong again. If we explain why, goods and services is on the inner ring, yeah, from firms to the product market, and then from the product market back to the households. So that's how goods and services get onto us, right? And that inner ring, we already said, is anti-clockwise, not clockwise. So that one is wrong. I'll just put anti-C here. Incomes flow anti-clockwise. So how do incomes flow? Incomes flow from firms to the factor market. Okay, and then they get to households from the factor market. So which way are we flowing there? We're flowing clockwise on the outer ring. We've already gone through that, so therefore that is wrong. And finally, resources flow anti-clockwise. It's the only one we're left with, so we know that it's right. Resources flow from the factor market to firms, and we can see here that that is anti-clockwise. Question 20. I won't spend too long on this. You guys can check over your economic growth chapter where we go through nominal, real GDP. There's nothing really to say other than when we're converting nominal GDP to real GDP, we take the changes in the price level. So remember that we have to have a base year on which to base off of, and then we use our CPI calculation, which is essentially the change in the price level, to work out what our real GDP would be. So to get from nominal to real, we're essentially just accounting for inflation, and we account for inflation through the changes in the price level. Okay, remember, nominal is just the changes in the price alone, assuming for the GDP. Real GDP, we're adjusting for inflation through the changes in the price level. It's nothing to do with exchange rates, with interest rates, or taxation. Question 19. Why might aggregate demand increase when a country's price level falls? Okay, so one thing to remember here is that why will AD increase when the country's price level falls? So essentially they're just talking about an AD diagram. The price goes down, why will the AD go up, right? Now, why will AD go up? It is not because the purchasing power of savings fall. That's true, right? Purchasing power of savings will fall in inflation. But if the price level falls, purchasing power of savings is going up, right? Because we are now receiving, let's say if we have 1,000 RMB saved in the bank, if we experience a fall in the price level, which is deflation essentially, that 1,000 RMB is next year worth more than it would have been in this year because of the fall of the price of goods and services. Similarly with C, real incomes don't fall, real incomes will rise when the price level goes down. Both of those scenarios, C and D, would apply to inflation, where price level goes up, not to deflation. Imports become more price competitive. Again, that's not going to apply. If we have a case where price level of our goods and services drop, what happens is that the domestic market for us becomes more price competitive, right? So we may switch from actually importing, where the prices will stay the same, to buying on the domestic markets. Okay, So we'll just switch. We'll start to buy domestically instead of buying from abroad, due to the fact that our price level is not going to affect the price of their goods and services. So we're left with A. Domestic interest rates will tend to fall, and that is what happens when the price level falls. The two of them tend to be correlated. So price level and domestic interest rates will be correlated. In other words, price level goes down, interest rates will tend to go down also. And why is that? Because we're looking to stimulate the economy. (18) What change is shown directly by the use of AD and AS analysis? Really very simple. This is the price level. Okay, just think about it. When you draw AD and AS, what do you put on your diagrams? You put the price level, and then you put real GDP. Now, real GDP is not something that's given to us as an option here, so we have to go with the other one that is, which is the price level. The unemployment level, the change in the unemployment level is not directly shown through AD and AS. We can see if the unemployment level will go up or down based on our real GDP, but we can't calculate the value of that change just through using AD and AS. We also can't calculate the value of the change in the nominal income level or the wage level through AD and AS also. We may be able to see the effects of the changes, like an effect of a change in the wage level may result in cost push inflation, for example, where AS moves to the left. But we're not going to be able to calculate that change, right? Whereas we can see the actual change in the price level. 17. Table shows some figures from the balance of payment account of the US for a given year. What can't be concluded from the table? Okay, so export services were valued at over US 477. Okay, we can see that's true because our imports of services is 477 and our balance of trade and services is a positive figure. Therefore, our export services have to be this plus this, which means our export services, without calculating it, will be about 710,000. So that one can be concluded. They were valued over that. Imported goods were valued at over 1632. Okay, yeah, again, we can calculate that because these are our exports of goods and our final balance is a negative figure. So if we want to get our imported goods, we need to add that 742 to the 1.6 million. So our imports were obviously 2.3 million approximately. Okay, so that can be calculated also. The level of exported services was less than the value of exported goods. Yes, because we just calculated our exported services was approximately 710k, but our exported goods were 1.6 million. So that is also true. Therefore, all we're left with is D. There was an overall current account deficit. Now, why can we not conclude that from the table? Because what we're missing is the other components of the current account balance of payments, which are the primary income account and also the secondary income account, where we need to have all four components in order to see whether we actually had a deficit or a surplus. 16. Which combination of government measures is most likely to increase the consumption of a merit good? Okay. So we look at minimum and maximum price first. Remember, a merit good is a good that is generating our external benefits. So we want society to consume them, right? We want to increase the consumption of those goods. Therefore, we're going to set a maximum price and we're not going to set a minimum price, right? So if we set a minimum price, what does that do? That creates excess supply. yeah, but it reduces the level of our demand. Whereas if we impose a maximum price, we're setting it below the equilibrium level, so we're making it cheaper for people to consume, and through setting the price level below equilibrium, we are creating excess demand, right? Which is what we want, because we want the demand for a merit good to increase due to the external benefits that it generates. Now, in order to fix this, that's going to reduce the supply, right? So what would we do? We would pay producers a subsidy, which may allow us, or allow them, to increase their level of supply, which may be able to meet the excess demand that we created through the maximum price. Okay, subsidy and maximum price go together. If we impose an indirect tax, all that's going to do is it's going to create additional or an even greater level of excess demand, because it would shift the supply curve to the left, which is not what we want to do. We want to encourage consumption and production. We don't want to discourage consumption and production for a merit good. 15. This is going to be a long video. The table shows changes in a consumer's expenditure on various goods when her income increases from $20,000 to $24,000. Assuming all instrument income elasticity of demand greater than 1.00. Greater than 1.00. Okay, so first thing to do is to calculate the change in income, right? And remember our formula. Our formula for YED, or income elasticity of demand, is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in income. Okay, now our percentage change in income, our income is changed by 4,000 here, so we put 4k over 20,000, and what we're going to get is a 20% change in income. Okay, then all we have to do is we have to change or figure out our change in demand. So for W, we've gone from 100 to 96, so that is a 4% change. We look at our formula, 4% over 20% is going to be less than 1.00. It's going to be 1/5, which would be 0.20, so that's wrong. X, we can tell straight away without even calculating it, that's going to be less than 1.00, not greater, because there was a 0% change in quantity demanded. Y, 24 over 200 is the same as 12 over 100, which is a 12% change in quantity demanded. 12% over 20%, less than 1.00. It's going to be 0.60, if my maths is correct. Okay, so the only one that's left, which would be greater than 1.0, is here, which will be a 24% change in quantity demanded from 200 to 248. 24 over 20 will give us 1.20 as the income elasticity of demand. So Z is the only one that will be income elastic. Question 14. Now there's not too much to go through on this, because what you have to understand is the diagram they're showing you. Okay, now this is actually allied or alluded to in the revision notes that we give you. Okay, so when we have a demand diagram that looks like this, what you have to recognize is that the demand diagram that looks like this is unitary. Okay, so without even looking at the changes, this is all available in your slides, by the way. We know that when we have PES, for example, that if it comes out of the point of origin, that shows a unitary PES. So what you have to get familiar with is what a unitary PED would look like. And it would look exactly like this, or it may look something like this, where they bring it up from the top of the vertical axis to the bottom of the horizontal axis. okay? But it will change at different points along that linear demand curve. Whereas here, even if you look at the areas are very similar. Unitary, we know, will be -1. -1.00 exactly, to be precise. Okay, so if you need a refresher on that, if you're confused as to why, anytime they show you this diagram, you know straight away that it's going to be unitary. Okay, so all you're looking for is the value that's going to be -1 or -1.00. All the other values will be incorrect because of the fact that we know it shows unitary. Okay, refer back to your slides or refer back to the revision notes for that. You'll see that diagram exactly in those slides and revision notes. Okay, 13. What would cause a market to be in disequilibrium? When a decrease in demand for a product leads to a price fall that results in some producers leaving the market. Okay, that is not going to result in disequilibrium. That will just result in us reaching a new equilibrium. A decrease in demand for a product leads to some producers being unable to sell products at the current price. Okay, now that will lead to a disequilibrium, because remember that disequilibrium essentially equals either excess demand or excess supply, right? If we have a movement in demand or supply that results in a new equilibrium, that is not disequilibrium, it is just a movement to a more or a new efficient point. So that's what happens here. We're told in C that the product will clear, which tells us that we've reached a new equilibrium point. And for D, when a decrease in the supply of a product leads to a price rise that makes it too expensive for some poorer households, again, we'll just reach a new equilibrium point. It won't result in either excess demand or excess supply. Okay? Whereas B will. Question 12. Diagram shows the market for electric cars with X as the equilibrium. What will the new equilibrium be when the price of electric car batteries fall and consumers become more environmentally aware? Okay, so what's going to happen here is basically, if we take it step by step, right? Now, I disagree with this question, to be honest with you, because what we learn is that complements and substitutes will affect demand, right? But when we get these questions, the thing with Cambridge is, you know, there's going to be one shift in supply and there's going to be one shift in demand, right? So identify which one is going to happen. Consumers becoming more environmentally aware, that's going to shift demand to the right, yeah? So we know straight away that the price of electric car batteries falling is going to shift our supply, because they always give one demand and one supply shift every single time these questions come up. Okay, you'll see that in the other papers. So just by common sense, that would mean that our supply would have to increase as the price of the car batteries that we use has fallen, right? It might make the good cheaper, the electric cars to be cheaper. So we'll have an initial shift in our supply to the right, we'll move to D, and then we'll have our shift in the demand to the right as the consumers become more environmentally aware. That will lead to a new equilibrium of point C. Okay, question 11, difficult question, right? What statement about PES along this curve is correct? So let me just explain this first. We were taught, or we were told, that when we have a PES that comes out of the point of origin, that it would be unitary, right? So if it doesn't come out of the point of origin, we know that it's not going to be a unitary PES. It's going to have differing values of PES, right? And the theory about it kind of applies to the same thing we learned about our unitary demand, right? Or our linear demand curve, which is where in previous papers we went through this. We talked about how the elasticity or the PED level will change as we move along the linear demand curve, right? So we said that, for example, we tend to be unitary in the middle of the linear demand curve. We tend to be more elastic the further to the right that we go, because our quantity demanded, or our quantity that's being traded, is a larger number, so the percentage change will be less. And then we tend to be more inelastic towards the top, as the quantity, sorry, other way around, apologies, we tend to be more elastic here at the top, because our quantity is dealing with a smaller number, so the percentage change will be bigger. And we tend to be more inelastic the further to the right that we go, because we're dealing with larger numbers, so any change in quantity demanded here will be a smaller percentage change. Okay, so the theory applies the same to what we're shown in a linear supply curve here. At this point down here towards the bottom, right, we're going to be perfectly inelastic at this point, right? And we're going to be perfectly inelastic because our quantity won't be able to change here, right? So it's only the price that can change. Same thing will happen is that as we move up along this supply curve, right, our PES value is going to rise as we move up along it, because we get more responsive to the change in price that's happening here. Okay, so PES is greater than unity at all points along the supply curve. We've just disproven that. PES is the same, we've just disproven that as well. And PES is elastic when the price is low and becomes more inelastic when the price rises. It's the opposite way around. It's more inelastic when the price is low, and it's more elastic as the price goes up. So PES rises when the supply rises. Okay, please forgive me, it's been a long day. I can barely think at this stage, and we're 47 minutes in. Okay, very similar to question paper 11, specific tax question. So in the diagram, S is the supply curve before the tax, and ST is the supply curve after the tax. So which area represents the part of the tax revenue paid by the producer? Okay, so we're looking for essentially the burden that's placed on them, right? So essentially it's very simple. Like, what we're going to have here is the new price down to this level where it hits the supply. So or WTP, if I can just put that here, that is going to be our total burden. Okay, in other words, the burden that is borne by the consumer and the producer for the indirect tax. So total burden. The burden that is borne by the consumer is the difference between the price they're paying now and the price they were paying previously, right? At the new level, that is the quantity that's traded. So that would be or W QU would be the consumer burden. The incidence, or essentially the increased level that they have to pay as a result of that tax, and then the burden that's left over from our total burden would be the burden that is borne by the producer, okay, or the revenue that the producer would have to pay because of the imposition of the specific indirect tax. So that would be QUTP. Okay, and if we just match that up, we can see here PQUT, which is obviously the same, right? Just those four corners essentially of the area. Or PWT, that area is our total burden. Q or WU, that area is our consumer burden, and O or WY is not an area that represents the specific tax. Okay, question 9. So a change in, where am I here? Sorry. A change in the price of a good causes an increase in the quantity of the good demanded. What would be the nature of the good and the direction of price change for this to be certain to happen? Okay. Change in the price of a good causes an increase in the quantity of the good demanded. So we just have a look at these. For there to be an increase in the quantity of the good demanded, if it's a normal good and if the price goes up, the quantity demanded would go down. So that's wrong. If it was an inferior good and the price of the good rose, okay, same thing. So we're left easily, we should be able to tell that a normal good with a price change where the price of the product goes down will result in an increase in the quantity demanded of the good. Okay, the nature of the good and the direction of the price change is harder to tell for an inferior good, but also we remember that we measure the inferior good through YED, right? So we measure it in relation to our income changes. Therefore, they're giving us a hint essentially that they're telling us about a normal good. Okay, and the only thing we know about a normal good is that it's a plus-minus relationship. Price goes down, the quantity demanded has to go up, so we know it has to be C. Okay, question 8. Cross-elasticity of demand between bus travel and rail travel is +2, so we know that they're strong substitutes. A rise in the price of bus fares caused the demand for rail travel to rise by 10%. What change in bus fares would have caused this? Okay, so implement it into your formula. Remember that the cross-elasticity demand is a change in the price of we're comparing two goods, of good A and then with good B, right? So what we have here is we would have, let's say rail travel is good A. We would have essentially plus 10%, okay, divided by X, good B, which is going to be our bus fares, is going to be +2. Okay, so we know that X has to be a positive, has to be a plus, right? Because we can't get a plus for our value otherwise, and we know straight away the price has to increase. What does it have to increase by to give us +2? Must be 5%, right? So all we need to do is we need to find a 5% price change here from cents to cents. And we should be able to see straight away that that would be A. 1/20 is a 5% price change. So we know that that one is correct. 3/30 is a 10% price change. That would give us, or that would mean that our XED value would be +1, not +2. This is an 8% price change, or 5/40, whatever, not 5 anyway, and then 20% price change for the bottom. Okay, so we just find the one that matches with our formula and we know has to be giving us an XED value of +2. Okay, there's a worldwide shortage of oil. The diagram shows the consumption and production of oil in billion tons for selected countries. What can be concluded from the diagram? So A, in Britain oil has zero opportunity cost. Okay, well that's never going to be the case, right? Because oil will always have an opportunity cost, as will every good or service, because even though Britain is consuming and producing the exact same amounts of oil, that doesn't necessarily mean it has no opportunity cost, because what they decide to produce for oil, the opportunity cost is what they could be producing instead of oil. So they will still have an opportunity cost irregardless of their consumption and production levels. In Japan, there's self-sufficiency in oil. We can see that's wrong because Japan is consuming, but they're not making any oil. It's impossible to be self-sufficient if you're not making the product yourself. In Russia, there's no shortage of oil. Okay, we can see that one is actually true. Okay, there's no shortage of oil because they are producing a lot more than they are consuming. And in the United States, rationing is the only solution to oil shortage. Consumption in the United States greatly exceeds their production level, but that's not true because maybe in the United States they haven't heard of something called imports. Okay, or maybe the economist who is proposing this has never heard of an import. So they can just import the oil that they need. Okay. Rationing is not the only solution to a shortage. Or similarly, if I just expand on this, they could also provide subsidies to the oil industry, etc. Or they can find other ways around increasing or either decreasing their consumption or increasing their production. But it's likely that they're probably focusing on other industries that are more competitive. Remember that oil is a resource that's only found in a number of countries anyway, so sometimes it's actually impossible to increase your production because you may not have enough oil to be able to increase it in the first place. They can focus on goods they have a comparative advantage in, and they could just trade for the levels of consumption that they need. Question 6. Which pair of products are substitutes both in consumption and production? I'm not going to spend too long on this. Which ones do we use when we produce and we consume at the same time? Barley and cotton, no. Gold and silver, no. Soap and toothpaste, no. Spinach and cabbage, because we can eat spinach and cabbage together and we can make them together as well. Okay, whereas soap and toothpaste, they can't be made together and they're not consumed together. Same with gold and silver, and the same with barley and cotton. Okay, question 5. So what I'll do for this one is I'll just give you the correct answer, okay, because I'm conscious of time. Again, these questions you just need to be able to learn off the functions of the price mechanism. The correct answer is B, which is as price falls, it tends to persuade some producers not to stay in the market for good. Just to reference it from your slides here, you can see that it is provided on this slide, which is slide 41 of the interaction of demand and supply chapter, where we give you provision of incentive, the signaling and transmission of preferences, and also rationing, which are the 3 functions of the price mechanism. Okay, and it actually mentions it here. If low prices persist, suppliers may well decide to leave the market. Okay, hence it meets the incentivizing function, which they've actually told us there. Question 4. What is not likely to result from the use of division of labor? That would be an increase in motivation. Division of labor is likely to decrease average costs, economies of scale. It is likely to increase productivity as workers get to focus on a specific task, and it is likely to improve the quality of the product, but it is likely to decrease the level of motivation due to the repetitive nature of having to do the same tasks over and over again. 3. What is not a characteristic of a mixed economy? Okay, so we'll start at the bottom. Government provides services not provided by the public sector. That is a characteristic of a mixed economy. What are they going to do? They're going to provide public goods. Government prevents firms from earning excessive profits. Again, that is a characteristic of a mixed economy. They can use regulation, or they can create competitive laws and regulatory requirements in order to stop the monopolies from earning supernormal profits. And they also do manage the taxation rights, because the government will be there managing and collecting revenue and spending money on society, but they do not have a role in setting prices. In a mixed economy, we still leave that role up to the price mechanism or the market mechanism. Question 2. Assuming nothing else changes, what change in an economy's labour market will cause the PPC to shift to the left? Okay, so what we're looking for here is a shift to the left. We know that we're looking for a decrease in the quantity and or quality of resources. Okay, so increase in worker immigration. No, that may actually result in a shift to the right if we can increase the size of our labour force, at least certainly in the short run, and maybe in the long run, but maybe not the very long run. An increase in the retirement age, again, that's going to increase our quantity and quality of resources, not decrease it, so we know that we're not going to shift to the left. An increase in labour productivity, again, that's going to increase quantity and or the quality of resources, so again we would be going right, not left, through the increase with a shift. But if we have an increase in the school leaving age, that would decrease the quantity and or quality of resources. We would have less labour available through increasing the school age, okay, because people would be forced to stay in school for longer periods of time, and they may not leave school early to go and join the workforce, which is what they may have done previously before the government increases the legal age to leave school. And finally, which factor of production is needed first in order to set up a new business? Okay, they're giving you a clue here when they're saying to set up a business. Who does that? That's enterprise. The first thing you need is the owner. Okay, you can't have a business without an owner who has the skills, the expertise, and the experience in order to take on the risk of setting up a business. Capital, like we said in QP11, is a means of further production. Labour is just the people who are working in it, but you need the owner before you can provide or supply labour. And then land is the natural resources, but it's not needed first in order to set up a business. Okay, thanks for listening. That was a very long video.